Welcome to Nightmares Incorporated, where our goal is to make your sleep anything but restful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, entitled Case 23, The Harbinger. My name is Alex Chandler. I've been a part of the Richmond Police Department for the last 15 years, working homicide for the last 10 of those years. Over the course of the last 10 years, I've worked 22 cases, resulting in 22 arrests and 22 convictions. I'm good at what I do, yeah, but I also work with a top-notch team of uniformed and ununiformed officers, forensic specialists, and experts in ballistics. I don't do it all on my own. I'm intelligent, but not brilliant. There's not a hint of Holmes-like magic going on in my mind when I see a crime scene. No sudden epiphany of understanding. I'm rarely the smartest guy in the room, and I dare say that I've never dazzled anyone with my brilliance. I may have baffled a few people with bullshit over the years, but never dazzled them. My strength is that I'm a grinder. I do the work. I'm dogged. When it comes down to it, there are very few examples I can think of that would lead to an unsolvable crime. The clues are almost always there, even in cases where people think they've been careful. You just have to look long enough and hard enough to find them. You have to put yourself in your suspect's shoes, find out where they slipped up, where they made a mistake. In every case, you're dealing with another human being, so there's bound to be a mistake. We all make them. I've spent most of my career out of the spotlight, as most detectives do. 21 relatively peaceful arrests of suspects and not a hint of attention, which I preferred. I don't care much for attention. 21 killers off the street was good enough for me. But when I took 2 bullets and still brought number 22 out in handcuffs, well, that's when articles about me started popping up. Articles that called me things like Super Cop, or real-life Batman, or other such nonsense. These articles described me as having a relentless determination, or as the last man in the world you want hunting you. I never thought these fluff pieces described me very well, but I suppose they made for good PR. In reality, I'm really quite boring. And if your only exposure to a homicide detective is from television and movies, I'll likely come across as a bit of a disappointment to you. To start, I don't even have a drinking problem. While I enjoy a beer every now and then, I don't moodily sip from a glass of whiskey within a darkened apartment while brooding over the things I've seen or over the nature of humanity. I don't have an ex-wife that I have a volatile on-again and off-again relationship with. I've never even been married, in fact. I've never been involved in a high-speed chase, never been stalked by one of my suspects, never received cryptic letters from a killer expounding about the importance of their work and how much they respect me, but that I should stay out of their way. And other than the 2 9mm I took to my shoulder on Case 22, I've never been involved in a shootout. I'm not cynical or jaded. The years of seeing people at their worst have not given me a nihilistic view on life. I'm actually quite jovial when you get right down to it. I like my job and I'm good at it. The only thing that gets to me sometimes is that I wish we could prevent the bad things from happening in the first place. But unfortunately, that's not how police work goes. You're supposed to know when you take this job that more often than not, you're there to zip up the body bag and then find out who's responsible. You try to prevent it from happening again, because you can never stop it from happening in the first place. I've lived in Richmond, Virginia my whole life, and I must say that it is a mighty fine place to live. The cost of living is affordable. There's a vibrant culture here and a pretty strong sense of community in most places. The job market has been steadily improving over the years, and violent crime has been decreasing. But decreasing doesn't mean gone, and we still have our fair share of neighborhoods that most people wouldn't want to find themselves in at night. They're drug pushers, of course, a kind of human cockroach where if you lock one up, two more pop up out of the shadows like they were waiting there the whole time. And sometimes deals go bad, and someone ends up on a slab in the morgue. There's still some working girls walking the street, keeping the seedy little rat-infested hotels that exist far from the interstate and business. And sometimes with these women, there's a violent John, or a pimp with a nasty disposition that needs to be dealt with. There's still some muggings and gang activities, and of course, there are still homicides. Not as many as there used to be, but unfortunately I don't think that number will ever drop to zero. People will always think of a reason to kill each other. And that's where I and the team I work with come in. If you don't mind me indulging myself a little, I'll briefly explain what it is I actually do, and why there was a problem with my 23rd case when it was brought to me. Now, as you may know, the first and most critical step in any homicide investigation is securing the scene to preserve evidence. It always begins with the initial response by the first officers on the scene, whose job it is to establish a perimeter, ensuring no unauthorized individuals enter. This process prevents contamination of evidence and maintains the integrity of the scene. Once the crime scene is secure, the lead detective will conduct a preliminary survey along with crime scene investigators. If it's me, I usually take mental notes and sometimes even make rough sketches. I look for obvious evidence, of course, such as blood spatter, weapons, or any sign of a struggle. This stage is crucial as it sets the foundation for a thorough investigation. Missing a single detail can often throw the entire thing off, and in some cases render the crime nearly impossible to solve. The goal is to recreate the scene in your mind as if you were actually there when the crime took place. Many of the forensics experts I work with often employ various techniques, such as luminol to detect blood traces, or alternate light sources to find hidden evidence. This stage may also involve the collection of biological samples for DNA analysis if there's any to come by. However, once the stuff you've seen on all your basic crime shows is over, it's important to know that a majority of my time is spent on documentation. Documentation is the backbone of every investigation. This always includes taking photographs, filing reports, and writing detailed notes about the scene. Every piece of evidence, regardless of how trivial it may seem, is documented and collected. Evidence collection is done methodically to avoid contamination. Each piece of evidence is bagged, tagged, and logged. Identifying the victim is the next step in the investigation, and arguably the most important. This usually involves checking any personal belongings that may have been left with the deceased, speaking with witnesses, and utilizing various databases. In some cases, identification can be immediate. Unfortunately, in others, it may require more in-depth analysis, such as dental records or DNA. It's important to know who your victim is. In many cases, this can lead you to your perpetrator. Every crime needs three things: means, motive, and opportunity. If you can identify the victim, you may just discover why someone wanted them dead. If there's anyone who can serve as a witness, you speak with them next. I personally speak with anyone who may have information about the crime, including neighbors, family members, and anyone who was in the immediate area. Based on the evidence collected and any witness statements I may get, I then work to identify potential suspects. This can often be the most time-consuming part of the investigation. This process usually begins with tracking down individuals with known motives or connections to the victim. If your victim was married, you first look at the spouse. If they're under 18, you first look at the parents. Most people are killed by someone they know. It's a shitty fact of life, but it's a fact all the same. Once suspects are identified, they are brought in for questioning, the aim being not to obtain a confession, as that rarely happens, but to establish an alibi, thus clearing them off your board. Once the case is constructed and there's sufficient evidence, I make an arrest. The suspect is charged with the crime and the legal process begins. I work with prosecutors to ensure all evidence is presented effectively in court. I may testify, providing insight and explaining the investigation process to the jury. I'm explaining all this for two reasons. One, to highlight how procedural most investigations are. Many of them are completely lacking in a high-rise shootout, and to my knowledge, all of them play out with absolutely zero kung fu fights against multiple assailants. And secondly, that most of what I described above ideally takes place within the first 48 hours. The older a homicide case gets, the harder it becomes to solve. That was why I was none too excited when Chief Edwards dropped a case file in front of me that was 3 weeks old, and part of a growing investigation involving slayings at a few of the run-down motels that dotted the city. "The fourth one came in 3 days ago, Alex," he said as he slid the file across my desk. "We haven't made any headway yet. Working theory right now is that it's a group or a serial. I want you to take over as lead. It's only a matter of time before the press picks up on this, and then it'll become a fucking circus. You know that." I looked at the file, but I didn't touch it yet. "Is Jack okay with this?" I asked, referring to Jack Braddock's, a younger detective who had recently joined our unit and was the initial lead on this case. "I honestly don't give a rat's ass what Jack is okay with. He's had 3 weeks and come up with squat. Whoever is doing this needs to be shut down, and fast. Maybe the case should have been pulled when a second body fitting the same MO popped up. Jack just passed his detective's exam. The case should have been flipped as soon as a serial was suspected." I didn't say this as a form of admonishment, mind you, more of a statement of fact. The chief had me riding the desk since my injuries, mainly having me go over old case files to see if I saw anything new in them, and teaching a few classes on criminal profiling and deductive reasoning. Through that and my own experience, I knew that a potential serial is a lot for a young detective to take on. For any detective, really. Depending on their motives, serial killers can be some of the most frustrating cases to work, because usually their victims are random. And while the victims might share things in common, race, gender, sexual orientation, similar careers, and so on, there is rarely a connection between them and your suspect. In a city the size of Richmond, working a serial case begins with around 230,000 suspects. "Maybe I should have flipped the case," Chief Edwards responded, his tone tight but reasonable. "But I had to give the rookie a shot, right? But now he's in over his head, and I want you on it." "Jack's a good detective," I replied. "He's young, inexperienced, but he works hard and he's sharp. I'll take the lead, but I want him to assist. We gotta teach him if we want him to be better, right?" "As long as you can wrap it up, Chandler, I really don't give a fuck how you do it. I want whoever is behind this behind bars before this gets out of hand, okay?" I nodded in affirmation, and 15 minutes after the chief had gone back to his office, I made my way over to Jack's desk. "You had lunch yet?" I asked him. "No," the younger man replied, at first hesitating to make eye contact. I understood where he was coming from. No one wants a case pulled from them, even if you know you're out of your league. It makes you feel incompetent, makes you wonder if you're the right person for the job, especially when you're young. "I'm stepping out for a burger," I continued. "Why don't you join me and we can start going over this hotel case? You get me up to speed and then we can decide what to do next." "Didn't the chief give you the file?" he asked. "There's nothing in that file that I can't learn from you, right?" I countered. "And if we're going to work this case, I need to know your current thoughts on it." Finally, Jack's head came up, and he made eye contact. "We?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. "You'll second me on it. It was your case to begin with. You know the background. I'm sure you have theories. And I'm a bit rusty. Been riding the bench for the last 8 months." "I'll get my coat," Jack said after giving me a nod that indicated he didn't believe everything I had just said, but wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. 4 blocks away, there was a small diner that a lot of us at the department frequently ate lunch at. It was cheap, which is always a plus, and the food was pretty good and prepared fast, which can be a godsend when you sometimes only have 15 or 20 minutes to spare. Jack and I ordered our lunch and conversed while we were waiting for our burgers. "I don't want to sound ungrateful, because I do appreciate the opportunity, sir," Jack said. "I just hope this isn't some kind of charity case." "First of all, we work the same job, so there's no need to call me sir," I replied. "And secondly, this has nothing to do with charity. You're a good cop, Jack. Still a little wet behind the ears, but you're sharp and I can tell that you're motivated. I personally don't think it would be impossible for you to work this case out on your own, but things always go faster with an extra set of eyes that have seen a few more miles. That's why I want your take on this case before I look through the file and start forming my own conclusions. So walk me through it." Our sodas arrived, the waitress telling us it'd be a few more minutes on the burgers, which was fine by me. I was hoping that Jack would get enough time to cover the basics before she came back. "Okay," Jack said after taking a sip of his Coke. "So far, we have 4 shootings that have all taken place at seedy little motels. You know the ones I'm talking about, I'm sure. The kind of establishments that rent rooms by the hour and aren't too particular about their patrons providing a photo ID. All 4 victims had the same 3 wounds, seemingly inflicted with a 10mm hollow point round. 2 in the upper torso, 1 in the cranium. All of them in the center of the room. Kind of like an execution." "Were they standing or kneeling at the time they were shot?" I asked, wanting to keep my questions to a minimum, but also wanting to test if Jack had considered certain things. "Would that make a difference?" Jack asked, justifying my question. "Not necessarily, but it might," I responded. "If they were kneeling when they were shot, then it more closely fits with the scene of an execution. If they were standing, then it was perhaps just made to look like one." "Fuck," Jack said, shaking his head. "I should have checked that. Damn it, man." "It's okay," I consoled. "We can always ask forensics. I'm sure they can tell us. It's really not a big deal and might amount to nothing." "What else?" "Well, there were no prints found at any of the scenes, no shoe prints in the carpet, no casings found, and oddly enough, no damage to the door of the room, even though according to ballistics, the door would have been directly behind each victim. No sign of a struggle at any of the scenes, meaning that the killer likely got the drop on them. They were probably waiting for them in the room." "All the victims have been male, correct?" I asked. "Yes, sir," Jack replied. I let the sir slide this time, not wanting to break his recollection by making him self-conscious. "Were any of these rooms checked out to our victims?" "It doesn't appear so, sir. While these motels are about as cheap as they can get, they still have surveillance in the lobby. We have 4 different women who apparently rented the rooms that the victims were found in. So far, it's assumed that they're working girls, so we've been combing the area trying to find them, although the low quality of the footage makes it difficult to get a good look at any of them." "Find them for questioning or because you think they're suspects?" I asked, genuinely curious how he'd answer. "Both," he replied, being half right. "Why would you consider them suspects?" "Because they're on camera renting out a room that a murder victim was found in, sir," Jack said, not quite smirking, but close. "Wouldn't that make them suspects?" "No," I said, taking a drink from my own soda as I did. "Then what does that make them?" "A distraction." Jack looked at me curiously, and I knew what I was about to say he had already suspected. I believed it was just the enormity of the case and the pressure he was undoubtedly getting from the chief once the second victim showed up that was giving him blind spots. "We've got a perpetrator who obviously wears gloves and likely wears booties over their shoes at each crime scene. A killer who leaves the scene so clean that the only clue there were 2 people in those rooms are the obviously not self-inflicted gunshot wounds. A killer who makes sure there are no casings recovered and no bullets, except for the ones that fragmented in the bodies of the victims, I'm guessing. I don't think our pup uses hollow points for the stopping power, but rather for inflicting the most damage they can in 3 shots. Also, hollow points don't often exit the body, thus no damage to the door. But I think they put something protective over the door just in case, because while the risk of overpenetration leading to exit of the body is low, it's never zero. With all that in mind, I concluded, do you really think our suspect is careless enough to be caught on camera? Fuck, Jack said as he stared at me like a man who finally understands a complex mathematical puzzle. I'm an idiot. A fucking idiot. Of course they wouldn't. You're not an idiot, I said. It's easy to get tunnel vision in these cases, and we still need to find at least one of those ladies if they're still alive. Because the killer hired them to rent those rooms, Jack said, the look of the penny dropping in his blue-green eyes. Bingo, I replied, and I wouldn't put it past whoever this is to tie up loose ends. Our food arrived and we lapsed into a more normal conversation while we ate. I told Jack that he could fill me in on the rest during our walk back to the station. During the rest of our lunch conversation, I learned that Jack had come from a pretty rough area just outside of Washington, D.C. That when he was 15, his brother was shot over some petty gang activity, and that was what motivated his interest in law enforcement. He wanted to stop people like the ones who had murdered his brother. A noble goal. He had worked 2 jobs while going through the academy, worked the beat for 5 years before making detective, and was engaged to his high school sweetheart, and at the age of 26, he was soon to be a father. I also learned that he was a bit of a fan of mine. Not to go all fanboy on you, he said between bites, but your work on the Halverson case was truly inspiring. I mean, that was real Sherlock-level shit there. Halverson had been case number 15, a serial that stalked his victims for what turned out to be up to 2 weeks before striking. He'd learned their habits, their schedules, everything he could about them before making his move. The crime scenes I walked into during that case came straight out of a horror movie, because Halverson only struck when he knew that he would have all the time he needed to conduct his work. Various forms of mutilations and posthumous violation of the bodies were his M.O., along with Kabbalistic symbols painted on the walls in the blood of his victims. The man fancied himself some kind of druid paying homage to pagan gods through his sacrifices. A nut job through and through, and a dangerous one at that. I caught Halverson because he made a mistake, I said, wanting to be clear that I was not nearly as brilliant as people say that I am. He didn't realize that his last victim had the boyfriend over at the time of the attack, that Mr. Ryan Mitchell only lived a few blocks away and had chosen to walk over to their house on that cool August night. Mitchell took Halverson by surprise, and in the intervening struggle, Halverson was wounded, not realizing that he had left behind a bloody thumbprint as he left the scene sooner than he usually did, likely because he needed to patch himself up. Halverson had a DUI arrest 10 years prior, and it was through the prints they took at that time that I was able to make a positive ID. Nothing even remotely Sherlock about it, just basic police work. But Halverson removed the second body from the scene, sir, Jack said, unfazed by my admission of being absolutely average at best. You were the one who figured out that there was another victim when you noticed the second set of keys on the kitchen counter, that Mr. Mitchell had their own keys to Miss Rachel Nara's house. Halverson didn't notice them. Along with that, he had tried to clean the area. The thumbprint was on the bottom of the lip of the kitchen sink, which you found even after forensics had finished processing the scene. Once again, just basic detective work, I repeated. And forensics is good, but they're still human. Sometimes they miss something. That's why we work as a team. Be as modest as you like, Jack said, but a lot of us found that pretty damn impressive. And the Kendrick case, don't get me started. You take 2 rounds to the shoulder and still get your guy? That's like something out of an action movie, man. It really wasn't that impressive, I replied, tired of hearing about the Kendrick arrest, but not letting it show. I had seen Jack around the precinct, but I didn't really know him. This was just us building a rapport. Kendrick had already fired 7 rounds through the door before we made entry into his house. The 2 rounds that hit me were the last 2 he had in the mag. Seeing as I had my weapon pointed at him, he was pretty much out of options. Fortunately for me, Kendrick was a narcissist, and the last thing someone like that wants to do is die. No super cop bullshit, just luck, which is also part of the job sometimes. Jack seemed to accept this, and we lapsed into some small talk until we finished our lunch. On the way back to the precinct, we resumed talk on the case. Nothing was missing from the victims other than their phones, Jack said. Wallets were there, jewelry, cash, keys, cards, everything still on the victim, but no cell phones. Why only take the phones? I asked. Any theories? Maybe the perp didn't want police to know where the last call or text message came from or went out to? Jack ventured. Possibly, I said, but I'm assuming our killer knows that all it takes for us to gain access to calls and text messages is a subpoena to the service provider. They might not be aware of that, but considering the state of the crime scenes, it appears they've done the research. Maybe it's an app? Jack suggested. That does seem more likely, I agreed. There's lots of those damn things these days. And without access to the phone, we have no way of knowing which one it was that they're trying to hide. When we arrived back at the precinct, I got with a few of the patrolmen that were assisting with the search for the women that were on surveillance at the motels. I advised that they may want to extend their search to alleys and parks, as if they were searching for bodies, which I personally believed we were. I couldn't envision a scenario where these women were still alive. I was already forming an image of someone who was meticulous, a murderer who had done their homework, knew what we would be looking for, cleaned the scene, and took the only piece of evidence that could help us. I couldn't see a person like that would allow anyone who may have potentially seen their face to go on living. In my personal opinion, the women that were on camera were 4 more victims, but I couldn't know that for sure until we found at least one of them. From there, I had Jack take me to the most recent crime scene, at the Piney Cove Motel. That's gotta be the dumbest fucking name I've ever seen, Jack said as we pulled up in the parking lot. Like, where's the Cove? Or the fucking pine trees for that matter? You want to file a complaint with management? I asked. Jack chuckled, and then we were on our way to the crime scene in room 7. To say that this motel was run down would be a compliment. I personally felt like I needed a tetanus shot just from being in the parking lot. The Piney Cove Motel was nothing more than a den for drug addicts, prostitution, and others existing on the fringe of society. The room was dimly lit, the faded wallpaper peeling from years of neglect. A single bare bulb flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. The bed was unmade, sheets crumpled and stained, the scent of mildew thick in the air. The victim's blood was still on the carpet, another splatter on the door we had entered through. Forensics was still there, along with a couple of uniforms. Officer Martinez nodded at Jack and myself as we entered. "Afternoon, Alex," he said as we approached. "Hey, Martinez," I returned. "Do we know if the victim was kneeling or standing at the time of the murder?" "It appears that the victim was standing when they were attacked," he said, his voice steady despite the grim surroundings. "And there were no indication of a struggle either." I nodded, absorbing his words. "So," I began, turning to Jack, "it appears the victims were taken by surprise. The attacker must have been waiting in the room for them. Maybe they answered the door, invited them in, and then attacked. But why was our victim here in the first place?" "Maybe a drug deal?" Jack ventured. "Or a late-night hookup?" "Both are possible," I agreed. Martinez pointed to one of the splatter patterns on the wall. "These suggest that the victim was shot from pretty close up. I'd say a distance maybe 5 feet. "So it happens quickly," Jack said. The victim comes in either under their own power or with encouragement from our perp, and the attacker finishes the job without much fuss. I nodded in agreement. There's not much conversation, no struggle, just gets them to the center of the room and fires. The attacker then leaves, taking with him any potential evidence, cleaning up enough to prevent any immediate clues. It's meticulous, calculated. But what's the motive? And the grouping of the bullets, Jack continued contemplatively. Pretty accurate. 3 shots before the body hits the floor? You think it might be someone with training? Maybe a professional? I'm not thinking so, I said. 3 bullets, 2 in the chest, 1 in the head from maybe 5 or 6 feet away. I think anyone could learn to do that with enough practice. And I'll have to look into the victims to see if there's anything about them that would suggest that a professional would come after them. We spitballed a few ideas for a while, but ended up nowhere. As we went our separate ways, at the end of the day, I told Jack that I'd reconvene with him at the precinct in the morning, that I'd be taking the case files home to learn what I could about the victims. Lacking any evidence or a single clue, I was hoping that something about the 4 men who had been killed would give me a direction to look. There was still no word on the women from the lobby cameras. At the time, we were stonewalled. Once I was back at my apartment, I brewed a pot of coffee and started going through the case files. Pictures of the crime scenes offered much in recreating the events as best I could in my own head, but pictures are always more helpful if you're there when they're taken. Sometimes looking at them will jog certain things in your memory. We always see more than we think we see. Our perceptions often pick up on things that we don't immediately notice, filing it away for later. Pictures can help those things become more prevalent in your mind. But it was the victims that held my focus on that first evening. Their wallets were still there, along with their driver's licenses, meaning that we had access to the names and addresses of the victims from the get-go. Unfortunately, this provided very little help to me, as there didn't seem to be anything that these men had in common other than gender. They all worked different careers, seemed to run in different social circles. None of them seemed particularly wealthy. I thought that perhaps maybe gender was the motive. Maybe our killer was just someone who hated men. But that didn't seem right somehow. Crimes fueled by hatred are usually more violent, the goal seeming to want the victim to suffer before they died. These killings were too quick, too clean. There were no signs of desecration to the corpse afterwards, and no sign of assault before the shootings. These murders seemed completely lacking in any emotional motive, so something as cut and dried as a hatred of men didn't seem likely. Yet nothing was taken from the victims other than the phones, so monetary gain didn't appear to be the motive either. Now maybe these victims were connected in some way that I wasn't seeing. Maybe they all belonged to the same social club or were members of the same Boy Scout troop when they were younger, or had some other connection in their past that was yet to be revealed. The phones were the missing piece, I knew. I agreed with Jack's suggestion that there was an app that they would all share, and that would be the connection. Something that would be nearly impossible for us to investigate, since there was no way for us to know which one to look into. I looked at the victims again. 2 of them were apparently single, the other 2 were spouses on record. Considering the crime scenes and the area of Richmond the crimes took place, I decided to go with a hunch, and the next day when I met up with Jack at the precinct, we went to visit the widow of victim number 2. I will withhold her name and any description of either her home or her person in order to protect her privacy as much as I can. Through our interview with her, I learned that she believed her husband was at a poker game on the night of his murder. This discrepancy in the thought of the missing phone prompted me to ask the lady if there was any activity in their bank statements that she didn't recognize. When she said there wasn't, I asked if her late husband had any private accounts. She stated that they both had private accounts for their individual spending on things not related to the home. After obtaining the name of the banking institution and a signed statement from the widow, we had access to the most recent activity of our victim's bank account by that afternoon. On the bank statement, there was a charge from a dating website, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that the other victims had this app on their phones as well. This was the missing piece. I will also withhold the name of the site that was used for legal reasons, as there are currently lawsuits from the two widows and a few of the family members of the other two victims. Although, despite how much I loathe defending a corporation, I fail to see how the site could be held responsible for what happened. So our killer is using a dating website to draw in their victims? Jack said. Yeah, I affirmed. It's a good strategy. You find lonely victims that'll come right to you. No questions asked in most cases, I imagine. And with the married men, you not only have a victim that'll come right to you, but will also cover their own tracks in the meantime. You think it's a lady who has an axe to grind with men? Maybe punishing the ones committing adultery? I don't think so, I said. If all the victims were married, then I'd say there might be something to that. And the lack of violence at the scenes makes this being the crimes of someone who's angry seem unlikely. I'm not sure our perp is a woman at all, but I'm staying open-minded about that since we don't have much of anything to go off of. Being struck by inspiration, I looked at Jack and said, "You got any decent-looking guy friends?" "Are you looking for a date?" he asked without skipping a beat. "I ain't got time for that," I responded. "I need you to find a friend with no connection to law enforcement that's comfortable with either allowing you to take over their social media accounts or create fake ones under their name. Then I want you to create a fake account on this site using pictures of your buddy." "I figured that's where you were going," Jack said. "But why the fake social media accounts?" "Because our perp is gonna check. So if you have to create fake accounts, make them convincing. And make sure whoever assists you disables their own accounts. Our killer is thorough, so it needs to be believable. You gotta be like a flathead catfish." Jack looked at me and asked his question with a raised eyebrow. "It's a catfish that hunts its own kind," I said in answer to his silent question. "It's a long shot," I continued, "but right now that's all we got. Pay whatever is needed from the app to get your profile highlighted and boosted as much as possible. It's already slim that our perp will see it, so do everything you can to improve the odds. Engage with everyone you can and try to come across as desperate if you can. Our perp wants people that'll run right to him." "I'll get to work on it." Jack agreed and went back to his desk to get started. While Jack worked on his part, I continued going through the case files. I read the statements given by the motel clerk who was on duty when the women on camera came in. As Jack had said, driver's licenses weren't a top priority for any of these establishments, so we didn't have any names to work with. All they got from the clerks is a little more than what we got on camera. 4 different women, 2 with blonde hair, 1 with black hair, 1 with green hair. All of them were conventionally attractive, wearing revealing outfits, heels, and according to one of the clerks, too much damn makeup. I thought that maybe I would revisit one of the clerks, if not all of them, see if I could get anything else from them. I figured I'd start with the first one, who contaminated the crime scene after they started trying to clean up after they found the victim. They were still considered a suspect, but I agreed with Jack's notes, that this clerk seemed too simple-minded to be our killer, and likely just panicked before calling the police. There was also the question of how the victims got into the room, because according to the clerks, no one showed up to pick up a key at the front desk. That left 2 options. Either the killer opened the door for them, or the door was left propped open. I was leaning toward the door being propped open because whoever was waiting in those rooms was not the person the victim was expecting. So unless the killer answered the door and then forced the victim into the room at gunpoint, which was completely possible, but it seemed simpler to me to just have the door slightly ajar and allow them to walk right into a trap. That brought me to thinking about the perpetrator. Trying to come up with a profile of a serial is always a daunting task. Essentially, you're trying to understand the motives of a complete stranger based solely on what they leave behind. In cases where the motive is relatively obscure, as it was with this one, it only increases that difficulty. It's kind of like seeing a silhouette in the dark and trying to fill out features with guesswork and reasoning. I was still unsure if we were looking for a male or a female. I was leaning towards a male, but that was mostly due to statistical bias. 80% of the time, when looking for a serial killer, you're looking for a Caucasian male between the age of 25 and 40. But I had to keep my mind open to other possibilities because I had nothing to base an assertion on. So instead, I turned my mind to what type of killer I was dealing with. While race and gender were up in the air, I could still make headway if I could understand why this person was killing in the first place. I didn't think I was dealing with someone who saw themselves as a visionary. There didn't seem to be a grand design to these murders, and they didn't fit the mold of being part of some bizarre ritual like the Halverson killings were. I didn't think I was dealing with someone who thought they were serving a higher purpose. All of the theatrics of such a person were missing. It was possible that this was a mission-oriented killer. Despite the lack of violence, I couldn't allow myself to dismiss the fact that the victims were all male so far. I may be dealing with someone who just hated men and was doing their part to eliminate as many of them as they could. It would still fit the theory that they were using the dating app to lure in easy victims, but there was still an issue with this line of thinking. Mission-oriented killers usually want to make it clear who they're hunting, who it is that they see as harmful to society as a whole. If it was truly just a hatred of men that was the motivation, then I would expect something at the crime scenes to indicate this. Either graffiti in the room, a message left behind as a kind of manifesto, or desecration to the corpse by removing a specific body part. Something. So although the scenes were missing these things, I couldn't completely dismiss it. I figured I could completely eliminate the idea that I was dealing with a killer whose motivation was power or control over the victim. There were no indications of a period of captivity, no signs of torture or other damage inflicted before the victim was killed, no assault, either pre or post-mortem. That left me with a killer whose motivations were solely hedonistic, which was the way I was leaning. While I couldn't dismiss someone who thought their murders had a higher purpose, that just didn't feel right to me. I was thinking that the act of killing was the goal for this individual. I was almost positive that I was looking at a murderer who was basically a thrill seeker, or someone who enjoyed the feeling of having control over life and death concerning their victims. That the murders themselves, or seeing how long they could get away with it, was the ultimate motive. I began to get the sinking feeling that we weren't going to crack this one before the killer struck again. Not unless Jack got phenomenally lucky with his fake dating profile and caught the individual's attention right away. Unfortunately, I was right, and 2 days later we got a call about another body. The evening before that, 2 of the 4 women who had been seen in the lobby cameras were found. One of them in a ditch just off the interstate, the other one in a dumpster behind a bar. Both of them having the same wounds as our motel victims. Our suspect was indeed tying up loose ends, and I had a feeling that the bodies of the other 2 women would likely turn up soon. In the meantime, Jack and I headed over to the latest crime scene at the Restful Inn Motel. The Restful Inn was another run-down, half-star establishment, this time located just on the outskirts of Richmond. As we drove there, Jack filled me in on his progress with his fake dating profile. "Any luck so far?" I asked as Jack negotiated through the downtown traffic. "I don't think so," he replied. I started by sending messages to every profile that looked obviously fake, ones with pictures that just looked too clean and staged to be actual people. Then I went to the ones that had profiles that were written a little too aggressively, being pretty straightforward with what they were looking to get out of the site. So far, I've received a couple of links to OnlyFans accounts, to a couple to other websites, a few ladies who apparently only needed $20 to fix their entire life, and if I'd be so kind as to send it via PayPal or Venmo, they'd be eternally grateful, and one who wanted me to open a Netflix account for her, which would have obviously given the individual access to my debit card. So, scumbags, but probably not murderers. The couple of legit people I was able to make contact with don't seem to be our perp either. Had a few conversations that seemed to be going nowhere, spoke with a couple of individuals who obviously need therapy, and got a couple of invites, but not to motels. Invites to where, then? I asked. To their homes, Jack replied. I was glad he was driving because I might have put the brakes on then. Wait, I said. You're telling me that people invite motherfuckers they've never met to their homes? Apparently. God damn, I said as I was shaking my head. The dating world has changed over the years. I wouldn't know, Jack confessed. I've been with Diane since we were in high school, so this world of online dating is completely new to me. Well, keep at it, I encouraged, because unless they slipped up and made a mistake at this latest scene, that app is still the best chance we got at finding them. We arrived at the Restful Inn and Jack pulled the car into the parking lot. The mid-afternoon sun hung high and bright in the sky, making the run-down, dingy motel seem like a mockery on this otherwise beautiful June day. As Jack and I approached the crime scene, I felt a familiar chill run down my spine. The parking lot was eerily quiet, adding to the tension that hung heavily in the air. Stepping inside, I was instantly struck by the cleanliness of the scene. It was almost too tidy, a stark contrast to the horror that had unfolded here. The body lay prone, just like the previous victims I had seen in the photographs, with the same wounds that had become a signature of our elusive killer. The precision of the injuries suggested a cold, calculated approach, hinting at a meticulous mind behind these acts. I looked at the body, forcing myself to take it all in. It was a younger-looking man. My guess would be that he was maybe 22 at the most. A dark complexion, short black hair, slim build. A decent-looking guy who was dressed up like he was heading off to an important occasion. He looked sharp, dressed to impress, as they say. The look of surprise was still etched on his face, eyes wide below his destroyed forehead. Right or wrong, when you're hunting a murderer and a fresh victim shows up, you feel like you've failed. That if you were smarter or faster, you could have prevented this. You feel like this victim's blood is on your hands as well because you just weren't good enough. That it was your job to stop this from happening. That if you were better, this person would still be alive. And assuming that there would be footage of a woman on the security camera in the lobby, I had to accept that she would likely be found dead just as two of them had been already. So I had failed twice. It's hard not to take that personally. It's hard not to feel like a fraud at those times. It's hard not to get angry and want to put a bullet in the piece of shit that did this when you finally do find them. It's in these times that I remember to breathe, to not despair, but instead allow the injustice of it all to galvanize me, to focus my mind. Surveying the room, my eyes were drawn to the bathroom door, slightly ajar. It was positioned right next to the entrance of the room, a strategic spot. I began to piece together a theory. The killer might be hiding in the bathroom, waiting for the unsuspecting victim to enter. The surprise attack would be swift and efficient, leaving little room for struggle or escape. It would be easy to keep the victim still in the center of the room, knowing that the door is at your back and they have no way of escaping you. The killer then latches the deadbolt, thus adding crucial seconds to an attempted escape, walks around the victim until facing them. Do they say anything to the victim? Or do they just fire? My money was on the latter, but in the end, that didn't matter. Guy looks younger than me, Jack said softly from behind me. Goddamn, what a fucking waste. Yeah, I agreed. It always is. We remained at the crime scene for the next 6 hours, combing over everything, interviewing the clerk that was on duty, dusting for prints everywhere there could possibly be any. But as was the case in the previous 4 scenes, we came up with nothing. Whoever this killer was, they were annoyingly careful, leaving behind not a shred of evidence that they had ever been there other than the body that they left behind. As we were leaving the scene, I instructed Jack to get with the other members of our unit and have them all make fake profiles on that dating app. That we needed to expand our net. We needed to catch this motherfucker before this happened again. That I didn't want anyone else's blood on my hands. He had responded with a yes sir, which just seemed to be his way, and I'd stopped correcting him by this point. 2 more days passed and the bodies of 2 of the unaccounted for women showed up, meaning at this point there were almost certainly 10 victims in total in this case, and that's 10 too many. I had considered telling the chief to reach out to the managers of every little half-star motel within a 100-mile radius and have them direct their staff to call us if a single woman showed up to rent a room. But considering that establishments such as the ones our killer was using probably see that dozens of times a day, we wouldn't have the manpower to cover it. And I think our perp was aware of that fact. He could use the same motels again if he wanted to, because on our end it was a complete crapshoot on where they would strike next. I'll admit that I was starting to get frustrated at this point. I felt useless. There was nothing for me to work with. It all relied on Jack and his catfish, as I had come to call them. 3 days later, we finally got a possible hit. But it wasn't on Jack's account. It was a beat cop named Alicia Smith, which we had been calling the deep cover catfish, and I found this to be mildly ironic. Going over the message history on her phone, it seemed like she had hooked the right person. The messages were aggressive, highly sexual, and Alicia had played her part perfectly, coming across as someone who was eager, flattering, and bordering on desperate. The final few messages were them making plans to meet at the Down Home Inn, a shitty little cesspool of a place located under the interstate, and the site of the first murder in this case. The person who I assumed was our suspect was instructing Alicia to meet them there at 9 p.m. that evening, that the door would be held open by the deadbolt, and they would be waiting for them in the bathroom, wanting to surprise them with a special outfit they had picked out. Once I read that, I was positive that this was our killer. At 8:30 that evening, we traveled to the Down Home Inn in force, using 3 unmarked cars with 4 officers in each car. The squad car that would transport the suspect would park down the street, well out of sight, while the other 3 would be parked near the exits of the parking lot. 7 of the officers standing outside, 1 remaining behind the wheel of each car. We had to cover any possible escape attempts. And if Jack and I got into a conflict with the suspect where we thought they had the upper hand, it would be easier for us to retreat along the sides of the motel as our backup closed in, seeing as each room was entered from the outside, which was what our killer preferred, as that meant they never had to go through the lobby. Jack and I approached the door to room 5 cautiously. I instructed him along the way to stand just outside the door, with his weapon drawn, that I would make the initial entry. The door was held open by the deadbolt as promised, the sound of light music likely playing from a portable speaker in the room beyond. I softly pushed the door open, making an effort to be as quiet as possible. Once I had the door fully open, Jack placed his foot against the end of it, holding it open, and giving him a clear shot at the bathroom door if needed. I entered the room and positioned myself just to the side of the door in the event that the suspect opened fire once they knew the jig was up. "This is Detective Chandler," I said in a tone that suggested they didn't want to fuck around and find out. "The motel is surrounded, the exits are blocked. There are 2 guns pointed at this door as I'm speaking. Leave your weapon in there and come out with your hands up. Let's not make this worse than it already is." Time stood still for a moment as I waited for what would happen next. Rushing in that bathroom was completely out of the question. The pup would have all the advantage. If they opened fire, Jack and I would empty our mags through the door and then retreat as backup closed in and we reloaded. Scenario number 3 would be that we hear a single gunshot from inside the bathroom as our killer decided to take the easy way out. Instead of any of those, the bathroom door slowly began to open. You always expect to see a monster when a murderer is revealed. You expect scars or a hulking brute, something out of a horror movie. Hell, at times you half expect to see horns and hooves. What is revealed never lives up to what you're expecting, and this case was no different. Instead of Jason Voorhees coming out of the bathroom with hockey mask in tow, I saw someone who looked like a college kid. Smartly dressed, clean cut, a pair of circular glasses on his face, and skin the color of coffee grounds, just like mine. His eyes widened when he saw me, but not in surprise or fear. It looked like he was excited, almost like he had been waiting for me. "It's you," he said in a voice that was meeker than I had expected. "Come on out," I instructed. As he did, Jack stepped behind him. "Take a few more steps this way," I told the man, motioning for him to follow me to the center of the room. Jack entered the bathroom and came out with what appeared to be a Glock G20. Using his radio, Jack informed the others that we had the suspect in custody and that they were free to move in. Ejecting the magazine from the gun and pulling the slide back to retrieve the bullet that was already in the chamber, Jack secured the weapon and moved behind our suspect. Jack completed a pat-down, the young man accepting this stoically, never breaking eye contact with me. "Nothing on him," Jack informed me. "Hands behind your back, no sudden moves," I commanded. The young man did as bid, allowing Jack to place the handcuffs on him. As Jack cuffed him, I read him his Miranda rights, slightly unnerved by his calm demeanor. When I asked him if he understood the rights that I had read him, he nodded his head in affirmation. "I just can't believe it's you," he said again, his voice having a tone of admiration. "Do you know me?" I asked. And then, "What's your name?" "I only know you from pictures and a few interviews you've given, but I know your work," he replied. "My name's Anthony Porter. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." "I wish I could say the same, Anthony," I replied. "What were your intentions here tonight?" "Oh, I was going to kill who I thought would be walking through that door. I'm assuming all of this was a setup, right? One of yours? Or was I talking to you?" Jack looked at me curiously over the younger man's shoulder. I was feeling equally perplexed. "You weren't talking to me. It was an officer that works with me. Are you confessing to the intent to commit murder?" "Of course I am," Anthony said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Those are the rules. If you get caught, I'm not allowed to run, or lie, or try to hurt you in any way. I have to confess, which I will, to all 10 of them." "You're confessing to the murders of 10 people?" I asked for clarification. "Yes, sir. All 10. I did it. You caught me." His unnatural sense of self-possession rattled me somewhat, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I informed him that I would take his confession back at the station, and had Jack lead him out to the patrol car that had pulled up once the all-clear was given. I rode back to the station in the squad car with the patrolman, Jack behind us in the unmarked we had brought to the motel. Anthony talked a lot during the ride, but not about the murders he had said he was going to confess to. Instead, he talked about me. He was very familiar with every homicide case I had worked on, right down to dates and times. He asked several times if I was planning on writing a book one day, or how some of my cases would make for a great movie, and how much of an honor it was to finally meet me. I participated very little in the conversation, only giving yes or no answers when he asked me a question. which he did very little of. Mostly, he just rattled off the history of all 22 cases I had handled in chronological order. About an hour later, he had been booked and was sitting in the interrogation room waiting for me. I stood outside the door with Jack, looking in on him. "What's this guy's fucking deal, sir?" Jack asked. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm pretty sure I'm about to find out, whether I care to or not. To tell the truth, I really don't care what his deal is, as long as he confesses and can provide proof that he's not just doing some kind of messed up form of clout chasing." "Do you want to come in with me?" I asked Jack. "Sure," he said, "but if you don't mind, I'll spectate. The dude kind of freaks me out." I nodded, not adding my own apprehension with this particular suspect. Something about all of this seemed off to me, almost too easy once we had caught him. We entered the room, took the 2 chairs on the opposite side of the table from Anthony, and began. "This is Detective Alex Chandler of the Richmond Police Department," I said for the record. "With me is Detective Jack Braddock's. We are here to receive the confession of Anthony Porter concerning the murders of victims' names redacted." "Mr. Porter," I said, addressing the man directly once the formalities were seen to, "am I correct in my assertion that you are indeed here to confess?" "Oh, yes, sir," he said, almost seeming giddy at the prospect. "I've been waiting to talk to you for a long time, and I am fully prepared to confess to all 10 murders that I've been accused of." Again with the eye contact, the gleeful look on his face, the transparency. What was I missing? "Okay, Mr. Porter," I continued, not allowing my unease to show. "Can you tell me why you killed those 5 men and 5 women?" "Of course," he replied. "Although the men were the target, the women were they were just collateral damage. I had to hire them face to face, you see. And I couldn't just let them go around being able to identify me, could I? I knew there were cameras in the lobbies, and even though the quality was probably shit, the odds weren't zero that you guys might be able to locate one of them. That wouldn't have worked for me, so instead I improved the odds in my favor." "Why were the men the targets?" "No particular reason," Anthony said in what sounded like a casual conversational tone. "They were just the easiest victims I could think of. Put up a profile of an attractive woman with large breasts, and enough nudie photos of the same woman, or at least someone who looks like her, and these men would come running right to me. Most of them with zero apprehension and no questions asked. I almost felt sorry for them, honestly." "So you were sending a message with them?" I ventured. Anthony shook his head and actually laughed. "Sending a message?" he repeated. "About what? How pathetic some men are? No, I don't give a fuck what these men were like. Everybody is fucked up in some way these days. I don't judge. They were just the easiest way for me to get a good score." The hair on the back of my neck began to stand up by the end of his spiel. A sinking feeling began settling into my stomach. "A good score?" I inquired. "What do you mean?" "The game," Anthony said. And then, "I'll have to run this back a little, if you don't mind." "By all means," I invited. "We are currently 25 years into the 21st century, and can you name one famous serial killer?" Anthony began with an exuberance that I found disquieting. "The 20th century had Dahmer, Gacy, Bundy, the Son of Sam, the Zodiac, the list goes on. But what about the 21st? I mean, of course there have been serial killers, but how many can the average person name off the top of their head? My guess would be 0. And why is that?" "True crime entertainment," Anthony said expressively, throwing his hands up slightly. It was at that precise moment that I realized that he was putting on a bit of a show. "True crime is everywhere you look these days," he continued. "On TV, in blogs, online videos, podcasts, it's fucking everywhere. Hell, this interrogation has a chance to find its way onto YouTube in the near future. You can't escape this shit, even if you try to. And people are desensitized to it. The serial killers of the 20th century were artists, man. Fucking legends. They had style and flair. And more importantly than that, they came across as completely alien to the rest of civilized society. But now because of the inundation of true crime, everyone thinks that they understand these people. Motherfuckers walking around like they got a goddamn criminal justice degree in their back pocket just because they've listened to a couple of podcasts. You can hear them talking about sociopaths and psychopaths and the difference between the two like they have an actual fucking idea of what they're talking about. I know this because I was one of them. I loved true crime, was addicted to it, couldn't get enough. I'd often frequent message boards to discuss cases, but there were too many people and too many trolls being edgy for edginess' sake. Anthony went on. I was tempted to ask him to get to the point of all this, but I had a sinking feeling that he was, and that down the road all of what he was saying would be important for me to hear. But then I found a message board that was hosted on a private server, very small community. Only the most hardcore of true crime fans. People that ate, breathed, and slept this stuff. People like me who could tell you dates, names, locations, everything. I felt like I was home. Anthony laughed, still maintaining eye contact with me, laughing at me from behind his eyes. At first it was pretty basic stuff, Anthony continued. We'd pick one case and pick it apart, piece by piece, going over every little detail meticulously. It felt so good to be with like-minded people that took this stuff as seriously as I did. We'd talk about the mistakes the killers made, of course, and how they got caught. How, according to the evidence that was publicly available, we may have been able to catch them sooner than the police did. The conversations would then inevitably turn to how we would have gotten away with the same crime. But that didn't really work, because we knew the mistakes or circumstances that had gotten the actual murderer caught. Working with hindsight as your friend, it was easy for us to say that we would have done this or that differently. So eventually we began constructing our own scenarios, role-playing as detectives and murderers. But even that began to fall apart more often than not, and devolved into almost a game on the playground, where people would keep inventing new ways to either elude the police or catch the killer. Finally, the moderator of the site laid down the challenge, for us to put our money where our mouths were, to take all the theoretical ways we had stated we could get away with murder out into the real world. And to make it fair, we'd all have to compete against the same police in the same area, preferably against the same detective unit. And since I'm local here, I brought up your name, Anthony said, and then smiled at me. A detective with a perfect record. The last man in the world you want hunting you, according to the papers. The super cop. That's all embellishment, I interjected. The perfect record isn't, and here I am in your custody. So I'd say you live up to the hype. Someone had to get the ball rolling, you see, Anthony continued. Someone had to go first and set the bar. I got a score of 10, which could have been better, but a respectable start. Others will follow my lead. They'll have to if they want to prove they're smarter than I am. How many people are on this message board? I asked, my heart now beating faster. What's it called? I can't tell you what it's called, Detective Chandler, but I can tell you it's on the deep web. That way you have a place to look, if you so desire. And as far as membership goes, I'm honestly not sure. When I joined, there were only a few of us. Anthony went on, his smile growing wider. And then that few turned into a few dozen, and then a few hundred. The rules of the game are simple. We're not allowed to harm you, we are not allowed to run when you catch us, and we must confess when we're caught. Beyond that, everything else is fair game, Anthony said, and then flicked his eyes quickly over to Jack. And while you might be safe from us, it's open season on anyone you know. Just in case someone wants to try and gain, a psychological advantage over you. Tell them to call the game off, I said. I'm not that smart. I'm sure there are plenty of people on that board that are smarter than I am. Those were real people you killed, Anthony. This isn't a fucking game. Anthony began to laugh, his eyes displaying all the remorse of a shark. I can't call anything off, Detective. They wouldn't listen to me even if I wanted to, which I don't, because it is a game. Those people meant nothing to me. They were just points on my scorecard. It's the same with the rest of my friends online. You want those future victims to live? Then stop who comes after me. Because someone will follow my lead. They won't be able to help themselves. And by the time it's over, people will look back on this point in the 21st century and remember us. We will shock this desensitized world back into fear. Beyond that, Anthony had very little to say. When we tried to press him, he only repeatedly asked for the confession to sign, that he was done talking. He added that since he was signing a full confession, there was nothing we could threaten him with either. After signing the confession, Anthony was escorted back to his cell, seemingly unfazed that multiple life sentences were awaiting in his immediate future. A little while later, Jack and I were sitting at our desks in the precinct having a cup of coffee and decompressing from the day's events. "Don't let him get to you," Jack said, breaking into the reverie I was in. "The guy's a complete nutcase. He probably made all that crazy shit up just to rattle you." "Maybe," I said, "but I highly doubt it. And I don't think he's crazy. Not in the way we traditionally think of it, that is." "I was wrong," I finished quietly. "Wrong about what, sir?" Jack asked. "Please, Jack, take a break with the sir for a little while and just call me Alex," I requested, and then added, "You did good on this case. I couldn't have done it without you." "I don't think that's particularly true, but thank you all the same, Alex. Now, why do you say you were wrong? About what?" "I had Anthony pegged as a hedonistic killer, someone who gets their thrills from the act of killing itself. But I was wrong. It's visionary-based. He believes that he's serving a higher purpose. The others will as well. I don't doubt him that there will be people who will follow his example, especially once the story gets out. He's the Harbinger, the beginning of something worse. We have to find that message board he was talking about and shut it down. And if it's true that the moderator is the one that kicked this off, we need that person in custody too. If they suggested it, now that it's happened, I imagine they'll encourage it. This is just getting started, Jack," I concluded as I finished my coffee. We finished up our paperwork for the evening and headed home for the night. Jack suggested that maybe we could question Anthony again in the morning. I said I'd think about it, but I didn't believe we'd gain anything more from him. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and nothing more that he wants to gain. Once in my apartment, I had a drink, and tried watching some television to unwind. But I couldn't get my mind off of what Anthony had said. We will shock this desensitized world back into fear. There's something dark looming over the horizon. I can feel it. And this time I do have a chance to try and stop it before it gets too bad. If we can find this message board and shut it down, if we can reach this moderator who started the ball rolling, then maybe we can discourage the others. I'll update this memoir as things develop. I have a feeling that things are gonna get worse before they get better. I just hope I'm up to the challenge. Alex Chandler, June 30th, 2022. Thank you for joining us here at Nightmares Incorporated. And we hope to see you again next time when we bring you another original story. Until then, sweet dreams.